Welcome to Campfire Conversations. I'm Jeremy Litchfield. Before microphones and media, we had fire. It was the first circle and the first stage. It's where people gathered to connect. This podcast returns to that circle. These aren't interviews, they're heart-centered conversations where love and fear both have space to show up. Campfire Conversations is part of my heartstrong adventure, a journey exploring where love and fear show up in our world, especially in the lives of men, and how freeing men from fear helps heal individuals, communities, and systems. These conversations aren't about providing answers. If anything, they bring up more questions. My hope is that what you hear makes you think differently, see things from a different angle, and maybe even sparks a conversation that leads to a breakthrough for you or someone you share it with. In this conversation, I'm sitting down with John Biewen. John is the creator, producer, and host of Scene on Radio. Over the past decade, he's taken on some of the hardest subjects in American life: racism, democracy, the patriarchy, and capitalism. His work has greatly influenced how I see the world. I'll be honest, asking John to take part in a campfire conversation felt a little like asking Michael Jordan to play a game of horse in my driveway. He's a professional journalist and documentarian. I'm an amateur dude with a campfire. The fact that he said yes tells you something about the type of person he is. We talked about the fear that sits beneath our economic systems and why so few people name it. We talked about what it means to benefit from a system you're learning to question. And we talked about love, not as a feeling, but as a commitment to action. John also names the fire he's spent his career tending: truth. And then he admits something that caught me off guard about his own relationship with community. We sat together in Hillsborough, North Carolina, on a rare day with snow on the ground. What came out is a conversation about justice, complicity, and what it looks like when two men stop pretending they have it figured out. If this work resonates with you, I would love your support. The best way to do that is to like, subscribe, and share this podcast with someone who might need to hear it. These conversations matter, and your support helps them reach more people. Now, let's go to the fire. John, just really appreciate you coming out here and having a conversation. I think it's a little, I don't know if you call it ironic or fitting, that a guy from Maine and a guy from Minnesota are getting together for a conversation in North Carolina, and we had to delay it because of an ice storm.
Yes, and it's the rare day that we would be sitting here with snow around us and ice.
Yeah, but I guess that's what the universe wanted us to do. But we have a beautiful day for this today, and yeah, just so grateful for you willing to come out here and have this conversation. I think I've just so admire the work that you have done in the way that it's inspired my thinking on so many different levels, and thinking about the world. And I guess as a starting point, I'd actually love to hear, here we are, a couple guys sitting around a fire in Hillsborough at friends of mine yards. It's kind of it's when you think about it, it's just random. I know how I got here. What are some of the things in your life that actually brought you to this moment that you think are important? And I don't even want a bio. It's just like, what are things that kind of brought you here to this moment that you think are important to share?
Well, I appreciate that question. It's a very open-ended question, right? I could go in a million directions. And I guess when you put it that way, what brought me to this moment, I guess the couple things that immediately come to mind are the fact that I'm sitting here talking to you, and that you reached out wanting to talk to me, to have this conversation with me, and that had to do with, I guess, the main work that I do in the world, which is to make a podcast called Scene on Radio, and that somehow that found its way into your life and made enough of an impact that, doing this project, you wanted to talk to me. So that means a lot to me. And, the other part of it, the other just sort of mundane thing that comes to mind, say that, is how I came to be living in Durham, North Carolina. And I grew up in Minnesota, as you mentioned. I lived the first 40 years of my life, mostly in Minnesota, other than a year in Utah, working for NPR, and a couple of years in British Columbia when I was a kid with my family. Anyway, but moved to North Carolina basically just at that time with my little family of 4 small kids, and now my ex-wife, actually. And that was just a kind of a geographical thing. I was wanting to yes, actually wanting to live in a somewhat less cold place, but also just not wanting to live out our days in the place we've grown up.
Yeah.
And frankly, partly for me, I have a strong interest, as you know now, right? Because you listen to Scene on Radio, in history and in questions about race and social justice and all those kinds of things. And North Carolina just felt like a place that's sort of richer in some of those painful, frankly, aspects of U.S. history. Minnesota just, was a state 100 years later and mostly white place. And so there was something appealing to me, given the work that I do, about wanting to move to. So that happened in 2001. I've been here happily ever since.
It's interesting when you call Scene on Radio a podcast. I have a hard time calling it a podcast when I tell people about it, because I tell people it's a documentary that's audio.
Yes.
And because it's like, podcast is shorthand, but I feel like in some ways podcast doesn't do it the justice that it deserves.
Actually, I appreciate you saying that. And because of my orientation and sort of how I came into this work, which was coming out of a public radio, documentary making and journalism background, and then being, for me, acutely aware of shows that all then became popular podcasts like This Life and Radio Lab and Invisibilia, right? These like very highly reported and researched and highly produced documentary shows that happen to become podcasts, right? Today, especially, increasingly, podcast for most people has come to mean people sitting in front of microphones and talking, and often actually video. You watch it on YouTube.
Yeah.
So I do appreciate that that distinction.
Yeah. It's I think as you said, I reached out to you, and really the essence of what it was about a year ago where I started formulating a hypothesis that is so obvious and simple. And I just like, you know what, the world works better where more of us are pulled by love than controlled by fear. That's just, I'm not the first one to say it, but it took me however many years for me to be like, duh, right? And I decided, I was like, I want to explore this a little bit more deeply. I need to understand that. And as I've been going through some of the topics or areas that you've gone deep into, and whether it's capitalism and kind of the environment and racism and men and the patriarchy, which I'm in the middle of re-listening to right now, it just occurred to me that you've seen like this through line of fear from my perspective and everything. And have you ever thought about it that way? So you're not tackling easy subjects. You're not tackling subjects that it's not easy listening. And I guess, what has been your framing for how you've decided what you want to actually go deep into?
Right.
And have you ever actually thought about it through the lens that, these are all like fear-based things I'm exploring?
I wouldn't say that I have never had that thought, but I would say it has not been in the forefront. It's been more like, if I were to try to express what is in the forefront, it's justice.
Yeah.
Right. And systems of oppression, and trying to understand them, and trying to go sort of beneath the surface that we usually deal with, and that even in my background or my training as a journalist, you would deal with, is at more of a kind of superficial level of, here's the problem of poverty in America, and what should we do about it? What kind of policy? But as opposed to, but trying to go beneath that into sort of a longer historical frame. First of all, how did we come to live in a world where we accept that a relative few people have most of the wealth, and then most other people have a little, and then quite a few people have nothing, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that's okay. Or that how and what role has race and racism, this story that we told, that some people started to tell at some point about these things we called races, what role did that play in how that got sorted, right? How those systems got. So anyway, just that's the sort of work that I set out at some point to try to do or to approach and to, for my own understanding, absolutely, but then to sort of bring folks along in these journeys of understanding about how can we come to see the world a little more clearly and how it works so that we might have better tools for making it better. That's how I probably more at the front of my mind, but I absolutely agree with you that fear is at the center of all of this in one way or another. The fear of, and there are just layers of, there's fear of the other, which mostly is taught. There's fear of, I often think that in terms of the economic situation, if you like, the economic dynamics in a country like ours, that one thing that doesn't get talked about nearly enough is the precarity of what most people live with, and this sense of in our society, if you're not one of the winners, it's really tough.
Yeah.
You can fall very far and nobody's going to catch you.
Yeah.
And that's the fact that we've set up our society like that has, I think, deep-seated ramifications for how our politics work and how we live together and don't live together. So yeah, I certainly I'm in full agreement that the kind of the dichotomy you've raised and the force of fear and the profound impact it has on all these issues can't be overstated.
It's the I went through so much of my life. I grew up in I would say lower middle class family. I was the first person to go to college. I always tell people we did not have an abundance of money, but there was an abundance of love in my life. Like it was just from friends and family. And, growing up in Maine, I don't know if you had that similar experience in Minnesota, but growing up in Maine, people just don't show wealth. It's not what you do. So you could have friends that are just, as we would say back in the day, millionaires, and you just wouldn't really know that. You knew they might have a bit more money, but you never really understood. And then I went to Bowdoin College, which I don't know if you're familiar with Bowdoin College, but it's a elite institution. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, I'm poor. And there was a lot of shame in that. I tried to become someone I wasn't, tried to make it look like I was from kind of a blue blood family and all this stuff because there was shame and because it was like I had this sense of like, oh, if you have money, you're important. That's what, that's where worth is. And it took me a while to unpack that and kind of let go of that. But
what did your folks do?
They both worked at L.L. Bean.
If I can ask it.
Yeah.
Oh, they did?
Yeah. And my dad literally started at L.L. Bean as a janitor.
Okay.
And so, but he built our house and it took years for him to build it. And it's also, I have to recognize the fact that his parents had a decent amount of land. So he got 20 acres and so you take these things and then I started to actually understand my privilege and be like, oh, okay. And, just given the things I had, I was able to get myself in a position where I realize now, even from a financial standpoint, I would consider myself wealthy. And not like a lot of it, but I then, and I don't want to call this guilt, but it took me 48 years to all of a sudden realize that I don't want to live in a world where it is okay and acceptable, where some people can thrive and most people suffer, and not just suffer, like die. And I even like, I had this thought one day around, I really wanted the Ford F-150 Lightning, a pickup truck, powers your home, all these great things. And I was like, I started to think about this idea of the unexamined life of good people, right? And I started to in realizing that, hey, if you were kind of living extravagantly, it causes suffering and death. And it's like, and I think that's one of the challenges is how did we get to this point of this being okay? And so many people, just as long as you're kind of above the line, you're willing to accept it. I mean, what thoughts have you formed on that as to why good people accept that?
gosh. Well, and we've constructed a society in which that is in which that's accepted, which is socially acceptable. That's almost just like a tautology. I'm just talking around in a circle there, but in the same way that in South Carolina 200 years ago, a gentleman owned slaves, and only some wacko would question the morality of that. There are parallels in our time and for us. And I've thought about one of the things actually so you mentioned the season we did on capitalism. Mm-hmm. And that was the most recent full season that came out in 2020, second half of 2024. And one thing that I did not do in that project, and it wasn't until after that I really clearly thought, that we should have done that, is to talk more directly about my positionality in that system, which is, and I kind of thought, well, I've worked in the nonprofit world and in the educational institutions, and I do understand that something like the public radio system, and certainly something like Duke University, bobs on the water of our economic system, and that most of the money comes from corporate profits, right? Ultimate people, the alumni who give millions to Duke University, they made that money somehow, right? And so on and so on. And then the families who can send their kids to Duke for $60,000 a year, whatever it is now, it's probably more than that. Where did that money come from? And on, right? So I understood. But also, I have a 403B, which is the nonprofit equivalent of a 401k. Yep. After 40 years in, just making a modest but respectable salary in the public radio world, and now at Duke, I have a reasonably comfortable chunk of change there to retire on. And it's mostly in the stock market, right? So if you're, the premise of that whole, sort of the exploration of that whole series is that this whole system is based on the exploitation of labor, mm-hmm. people's labor, their work, and of the natural environment to produce profits. And it's not that we can have a more nuanced conversation about what level of that dynamic is okay, because human beings, if we're going to live, we have to at least cut down trees and to build our home, right? We have to use the natural world. We have to eat something. So we either have to grow it. We decide we're going to eat meat. We have to kill something. So it's not, but at some level, there's a degree of that sort of exploitation to make one actually wealthy. Yeah. That becomes a different thing, I would argue. And I think people can understand why there's a case, right, to be made for, how much is enough and how much do we, so that in other words, just to say all of this to say that I am absolutely a participant in that system, even though I work for a nonprofit institute at a quote unquote nonprofit university, and my salary isn't massive, but I'm absolutely a participant. And I accept that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sort of like, should I have not signed up for the 403B when I was 30 years old as a cub reporter at Minnesota Public Radio? Because we don't have another way actually that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
That I was going to support myself in retirement.
Yes.
That was the way.
Yeah.
Yeah. All to say that, it's, we all have to, I guess I think there's value in sort of understanding where we sit, but then it raises difficult questions.
I think one of the Capitalism season hit me hard because I was, from the time in college where I decided that I made a decision. Well, it was like, I went from wanting to, when I was in middle school, I was a basketball player growing up. In middle school, I had my eyes set on Duke. I wanted to play at Duke. by the time I was 8th grade freshman, I was like, that's not going to be possible. But I still wanted to play basketball, so I chose a smaller school.
Oh, you
So
played at Bowdoin.
I did, yeah. Which was
I played D3 basketball too.
Where?
Gustavus Adolphus.
Oh, yeah. So just recently, this is my first time actually going on the Duke campus. And I was like, I didn't think I would have really liked it. It's like built in a forest. It's beautiful.
It's all words too.
But then I went, well, if I can't be a bad professional basketball player, I'll be a doctor. And then I went to teacher. And then I read a book called Double Dip, which was written by the founders of Ben & Jerry's, which was my first, I guess, introduction to the idea that business could be a force for good. Mm. And so I was like, this is what I'm going to do. And this fundamentally is what drove me and us meeting, because would you like some more tea?
Oh,
I think there's some more.
There's more.
Yeah.
Just a little bit. Thank you.
When I started, back in 2007, I started a company. It was a running and cycling apparel company, and got connected to Jay, Joe Gilbert, and became a certified B Corp. And this is fundamentally how full circle.
Yes.
So I was always a believer that capitalism was a system, and it can be used for good or bad. It's the people in the system that drive how it's used. And then I think it was in one of the first episodes in that season, and I could be misremembering this, but it talks about how a couple things had to happen for capitalism to really take hold and kind of accelerate like it did. Number one, we had to disconnect ourselves from the idea that we were part of nature. Because that made it look, well, if we're not part of nature, we can extract. And I could have made this up, or this could have been part of it as well. The next step was, once we're disconnected from nature, it's a much easier step to say we're disconnected from each other. We're not, you get to independence versus interdependence, right? Yeah. And
we talked about the commodification of things, of nature, and then of some people.
Yeah.
And certainly of the natural world, but then also of some people who would be classified in such a way that we could commodify them, and our labor.
And it was
commodified.
Oh yeah, exactly. And it was basically it was the haves and the have-nots. The have-nots were a commodity. The haves, and even right now through White Men for Racial Justice, we're doing a lot of work around kind of owner class, the owners and the workers. And I think about that disconnection among people. Because if you talk about cultures that stayed more connected, communal, interdependent, the idea of saving for retirement, it just doesn't make sense, because it's like, when I have excess, I share. When I need, and a friend of mine who said one day, it's like, I really struggle with the whole idea. Investing for your future is a purely fear-based thing, that I'm not going to have people to take care of me. And I was like,
I have to have my own.
And I was just like, it seems a whole lot more beautiful existence to be like, hey, let's just all take care of each other.
Yeah. Yes. And that whole, that we've just gone through stages, even in the last 50, 60 years, we've gone through further stages of further pushing individualism, individual and responsibility. Like you got to have yours, right? So even the shift from a company-based or a union-based pension, which was, at least it was a collective thing, right? Like there's money going into this thing, and we're all going to take out.
Yeah.
Right. But that you have your, and that you have your 401k, and you have your own little pot. Right. And then, of course, there was the move that never went anywhere under George W. Bush to privatize Social Security, so that we would have even not had that national system anymore. Everybody would have had their own account. Yeah. So we've just moved increasingly.
Have you read The Upswing by Robert Putnam?
I haven't.
Are you familiar with the book?
I'm familiar with his Bowling Alone and so on, but I don't really know that much about that book.
A lot of what you're saying is a lot of what he's tracked over time, but he basically talks about where we are right now is about where we were in the Gilded Age. A huge sense of kind of independence, individualism, and there was this huge swing And he basically talks about it was from the bottom up. It wasn't the top down. It's not that you don't want that. It was a bottom up, and that kind of peaked in the 50s and 60s where we had the most kind of collective community-based thinking, and then all of a sudden it's been this downward swing. And he writes about the book in a way that like there's hope. Here's the kind of the formula, and just always I've been having questions now around the idea of the promise of America, because like the promise that we were told was never actually the true promise. It was like freedom, equality, all that for a certain type of people. And as you have examined some of these systems and structures that are, not the best parts of our history, where do you see hope in terms of where there are some interesting things? And I listened again, and I had my wife listen to the live one you did in Durham as a follow-up in the Communities in Partnership, which was just awesome.
Yeah.
And it had me thinking a lot about community and how critical community is. Yeah. And the idea of community wealth. What does that actually mean and look like?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's funny to say this. Here we are in late January 2026, which is a very dark time in America, and actually a very dark month and a dark week after the latest murder of a protester in Minneapolis, Alex Preddy, all of what's going on. But that I find hope in a lot of what's going on right now in terms of the response.
Yeah.
And actually what's happening in Minneapolis is probably the best example I think of, which is, in fact, I was listening on public radio as I was driving out. On Point, isn't it? But anyway, the show, they were interviewing people from Minneapolis who are involved in one way or another. The pastor who has 4,000 volunteers helping to distribute food to families that are afraid to leave their houses to go to the grocery store because they don't want to get nabbed by ICE, and so on. And people who are doing that work, or people who are out patrolling and on the lookout for ICE to protect their neighbors. And this kind of, it's a very inspiring thing that's happening with that example that's being set in Minneapolis. So I think, and in general, even when you ask the question about where do I find hope, also in the history of these, is that there have always been people who have fought for something better and have worked for something better. I don't know if it always needs fighting, but have said, yeah, we deserve better. We're going to take action to build a better world. So I think that those people have always been there, and it's and part of what happens, I think, is that things have to get bad enough, or certain kinds of dynamics have to come together so that a critical mass can be built. Change comes, and it does happen.
Yeah.
There's lots of things that are better now than they were 200 years ago. Way better, like a lot of things that are way better. And one of the things that we talk about in the capitalism season, since we keep going back to that one, is that, a lot of when people look around now, people who are pro-capitalism look around and say, well, look how many people are living really quite well, thank you. Certainly in a country like the United States, I'd say roughly, I don't know, what do you think, 40 or 50% of us have some reasonable level of comfort, which isn't as good as it should be in the richest country in the world. I don't think a lot of people would acknowledge that roughly half of us are really struggling.
Yeah.
Anyway, but let's say, or that, I don't know how many, 1 billion people in the world are reasonably, I don't know what the number is, have some decent level of material comfort and security. The reason that's the case, and that it's, say, 1 billion and not just 50,000, is that people have fought over centuries, and certainly decades and decades, right? And actually a lot of, and I'm not necessarily a champion of like socialism is the answer. It's not that simple for me, but a lot of the things that that have got called socialism and been dismissed as socialist by the ownership class have been actually incorporated to some degree. And that's why a lot more people, that's why we got an 8-hour workday. That's why we got, instead of a 60 hour, 72-hour work week, and so on and so forth. Right. And then more people got a decent life. So yeah, there's always reason for hope. I think that things can get better and that people can make that.
I love
answer.
Yeah, no, I love that. I'd love to get your perspective on something, because when you brought up socialism, it reminded me of a conversation I had in a coffee shop a couple months ago. And it was a good friend of mine came in, hadn't seen him in a while. We were able to sit down and talk. And he just mentioned, he was like, his acupuncturist he had gone in to see. And she had mentioned something that her son said. So her son went to West Point, and he was just saying, Mom, it's like, life's really good for me right now. Like, a great job. I got amazing healthcare. I got like a retirement plan. I got all these things. It's just like, it's great. And he's like, I find it interesting that we're willing to use socialism to defend capitalism.
Exactly.
He's like, and it's like, where the question is why don't we, what's the point? If we know it works.
We can't acknowledge that, though.
Right? You can't even say that word without in certain spaces, without it becoming, it's gotten on par with communism.
Yeah. The Cold War was a great opportunity for capitalists to demonize any form of socialism, even as we were practicing fair bits of it.
Yeah.
Social Security, with Medicare, with
so one of the, we've been talking a lot about the kind of the fear and stuff. And I guess I've become to view that fear is the opposite of love. Some people say that hate is the opposite of love. I view hate as actually a byproduct of fear. And I'm not saying that fear needs to go away. I think fear is incredibly important. It's an alert mechanism, right? So when you actually think about love, and based on what you've gone deep in over time, how do you actually view love? How do you define it? I think for me, I've seen that we've simplified it so much, in the sense of love is about a feeling that you have for another person.
Right.
And I think that's dangerous. What are your thoughts on love as a concept, and how maybe our relationship with it has changed based on some of the things you've gone deep with?
Yeah, I think, and it's funny. It's a little bit of a parallel to your first question about fear, and my answer, which was that it's not usually the word that is in the forefront of my mind, and the same is true of love.
Yeah.
I'm usually thinking, but I would absolutely talk about kindness and decency, right? And justice again. But love absolutely works as another word for all of those things. I mean, this is a funny little example, but Jimmy Kimmel.
Yeah.
So I don't watch his show. I see some clips on YouTube. I actually semi-regularly will watch his monologue. Occasionally, I watch his monologue on YouTube, the same way that I would watch Seth Meyers, A Closer Look, or Colbert's monologue, or whatever. Just to, it's often a refreshing take on. Anyway, so Jimmy Kimmel, I watched it last night, but I think it was from the night before. It was from Monday night, I think. So he was talking about Minneapolis, and he was talking about Alex Preddy, and he just loses it. Standing on stage talking to his audience, and he's famous for this. He cries a lot.
Yeah.
But in this case, he's talking about Alex Preddy's family and Rachel Good's family, and he just chokes up and starts. And that comes to mind in this conversation where we're just talking about loving and caring, actually having feelings. So as you say, it's not so much about some some feeling ahead of time that, oh, I care about you because I love you. No, I care about you, which is to say, I love you, right? If it comes to it, I will love you. I mean, I will care. I actually care what happens to you, and will take steps to make your life better if I can, especially if you need that help. I mean, I guess that's what comes to mind. Yes.
Yeah. It's interesting. I've explored a lot of topics as it relates to the justice system, so-called justice system, and actually around the holidays, I got invited to go take part in a men's group within a correctional center in Virginia. First time I'd ever been in the prison, and so it was interesting. I'm thinking about like, what's a white guy from Maine have any business going in and giving advice to this group of primarily Black men. And but I think what I've seen, and whether it's inside those walls or even some events I've gone to, event I go to at last couple of years called the Returning Citizens Luncheon, which is, we're talking like a room of 300 people who are system impacted. Some of them are coming home. And a lot of people will talk about the system in the sense of like, it's your family goes to prison with you.
Yeah.
And the way that you would think that it'd be a hard space. It would, in the sense of like hardened, guarded. It's like, there's a handful of us white men there. You'd think of like, there would be skepticism, and no, pure love. And I remember another conversation one time where it was asked someone, why do you not hate us? It's like, we have fundamentally created the structures and perpetuated these systems that likely kind of led to where you are. And they said, well, we don't want to be like you.
Wow.
And it was that simple, right? And I sometimes wonder how much the people who are in those positions of power and privilege, how much they want to be like themselves, whether they know it or not.
Great question. Yeah. Or how much recognition is there who and what they are?
Yeah.
Yeah. People have a great capacity for telling ourselves stories about the way the world is.
Yeah.
In order to justify us getting what we want.
Yeah.
Keeping what we have. And we're certainly not immune.
I think it's even interesting when you talk about the stories we tell ourselves, which are, they're stories. And it's just like, even with my parents, who, like, my mom was kind of on and off from work for a variety of reasons. Number one, she stayed home quite a bit to take care of us, which was a total privilege, and some health issues. So for most of it, we were a one income family with a dad who worked in facilities. He's super smart and worked his way up. But even now, and they saved and made smart decisions. And so it's just interesting. I had to sit them down one day because they'll often talk about all these millionaires. It's like, you do realize you're millionaires. They're like, what? I'm like, well, let me show you some numbers. Here's your portfolio. Here's your cash. That doesn't even include your real estate. And I think it's really hard where we've created a society where it's so easy to keep always looking up and seeing people who have more and are better, and not actually looking behind us and seeing the people who are being left behind. And we do, but it's like we see it anecdotally, and then we feel sad, and then we go back to our and then we have to binge watch Netflix and eat Ben and Jerry's and to make ourselves feel comfortable and good again. And how much of the capitalist system is doing that to us in terms of like, this is what life is all about.
Right. Yeah, I'm guilty of that. And even just having chosen a line of work that is relatively modestly paid, right? Certainly compared to a lot of people I went to college with who went to corporate America and made lots more money than I did, or became doctors or lawyers, And so comparatively, I'm often more conscious of the people who I think of as being quote unquote like me, who have more, and I've had the privilege and advantage of being a journalist, so that I've from time to time spent time with people who have much less
Yeah.
to remind me. But it's still, it's easy to lose your sight of that. And then with the movies and TV, most people are upper middle class, and on even like the regular old family TV shows or whatever, they're usually not average
Yeah.
in the homes that they live in and so on. So we're just, it's always.
Yeah. Well, even like thinking back to Friends, it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, you weren't living that way in New York City. And then, the way that, even if you think about how people lesser means have been portrayed, it's almost like this parody. And, but it's like, I think when you actually, one thing I try to do every year is I go to, in very northern Maine, I go camping, but I choose to actually go to this very rustic campground, not going off the grid. And a little bit of it's like, it's very rustic. There's running water, there's no electricity, but there's a lot of seasonal people who go there. And we're talking people who have very different political beliefs than I do. But it's not flaunted. I just know. And I've always looked at that, and it's like there's a lot to be learned from how they're living, the simplicity of it. And it's like you go to some of these resort type campgrounds and people are in these souped up golf carts and stuff like that. And it's like they got side by sides. And I was like thinking, it's like, how many people in the circles I run with know what a side by side is? And like the idea of like what they find fun, as simple as it could be, mudding, fishing, hunting, is often looked down upon, right? And how often, and this is where I get into where I have challenges, and I think some people could look at me and say, well, you're part of the liberal elite. It's like, if you don't know me, it's very easy to say that. And I've even thought about how many of us travel to places that are in the middle of the country to actually learn from those cultures versus going to like international destinations. Because I think, this is idea, I think there's something to be learned everywhere. Absolutely. And like, what are we missing by not understanding their culture and learning from them, which obviously a lot of people felt unseen, unheard, unappreciated. And it's kind of gotten us to this.
Yeah. Yes. And looked down on. And, there was some astroturf in that too. Like there were powerful, rich people telling people these other people look down.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Shouting that.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was enough truth in it, unfortunately. Have a great.
Yeah. It's usually, it feels like in most cases that the truth is usually somewhere in the middle, right? So kind of last area I want to talk about, and one of the reasons why I want to do this around fire is I feel like, so I do a lot of, I'm a wilderness guide as well. And like fire is my thing. I think fire is a great teacher because it works. It makes you work. It's like you need to tend to fire. And I think you need to tend to conversation at the same time. But I view this idea of, I kind of think about tending fires in myself and tending fires in our community. So as you think about where we are right now and what you've learned and where we've been through history, what are the fires that we need to tend in ourselves and in our communities and society to get us to a point where we can all, thrive, where we can get to a point where we can disagree?
Gosh, we need to attend to the fires of community and of caring and of a greater degree of openness. And I'm talking to myself because I think we have got so backed into our corners. And I actually have opinions about this notion of polarization. It's I think that's an oversimplified
Yeah.
description of what has happened. In fact, there are studies that people have done that literally one side of the political spectrum has moved farther to the extreme than the other side has.
Yeah.
And certainly, I think there's a dramatic asymmetry in which side of the political spectrum is most interested in maybe just giving up on democracy because we just want power, period, right?
Yep.
This is not, so it's not a symmetrical. But that said, I think there is usefulness for all of us being open to listening to each other and to seeing and to understand. And back to even to the other premise of fear, of understanding people's fears and trying to understand what it is that people think is true and why they think that. I'm working on season 8 of Scene on Radio right now. Is on media.
Wow.
And our news media and our information crisis.
Wow.
So obviously these are things that are swirling a lot for me now about how people have, and what role has that system played in divisions and in the extremism that has come before. That's as we say, a whole nother conversation. But the fires we need to tend to. We really need to tend to the fire of telling. Back to this week that we're in, where we've been listening to president and several cabinet members just flat out brazenly lie about something that happened on the street in Minneapolis. And actually, somewhat inspiringly, seemingly being overwhelmed by videos that showed actually what happened and having to sort of really back down. So that's nice.
Yeah.
Right? Score one for facts and evidence. But yeah, that's a big one, right? Is every opportunity that we can have. And I think that goes back to even your question about what brings me here, or that sort of what I spend my time doing is trying to say stuff that's true.
Yeah.
And that feeling like amidst so much that's not true and so many lies and so much gaslighting and so many actually culturally nurtured untruths that we've all grown up with for generations, to in the face of that, to just kind of try to open a window that lets in the cool air of what actually seems to be true. It feels like really what I'm trying to do in the world. Like this. I guess that's a fire that I try to tend.
Yeah. It's an important one. Yeah, it is. I love what you said there too, that there are some untruths that we've just accepted culturally, and examining those. I had a thought recently where it's like some of our strongest held beliefs, I think we need to renew our vows with occasionally. Just check yourself, right? Because when you get too certain about something, that's probably and I'm not saying that you have to change your belief. It's just check yourself. Look at some other sources and just make sure that belief is still serving you. And because it gets so easy just to, well, this is what I was told.
Right.
And even oftentimes our beliefs aren't even our beliefs. They were handed down to us. They were inherited to us. And one of the conversations I had recently has to do with a sense of freedom. And it reminds me of this is basically freedom's hard. Because all of a sudden we have to be responsible for our own decisions. We have to use discernment. But if we have systems and structures, whether it's religion or whatever it may be, that says this is what it is and this is what you need to do, it can make it a whole lot easier. And because it's not on you. One last question, because it's an area that's really top of mind for me, and you talked about community. What are some of the high level kind of examples of just really great community at its best that you've seen? I've been just, even being here, my first time really exploring Durham, not only communities and partnership, which I was like just amazing, but I went to a coffee shop, Cocoa Cinnamon. And I always judge a community by their community board. If they have a board where people can put up flyers, it's like, okay, there's something going on here, right? And I was like, there's a really lot of interesting things going on here. I think, Durham's got some interesting things going on. So obviously communities in partnership and what they're doing, and this idea of, I love what they say, we're community rooted, which is we are making decisions for ourselves at our community, which I think is so critical. I've always, especially for someone who always has an answer, I'm always right. I always have an answer. What are some other things that have inspired you when it comes to community?
I should say, by the way, I really feel like I need to say in honesty, since I was talking about truths a minute ago, that I'm actually not great at community myself. I am much more introverted than not.
Yeah.
I'm not a joiner.
Yeah.
I like to stay home.
Me too.
And sit around with my laptop or read and write or do all the things, right? And so I'm not a great participant in community, if I'm being honest. I see my lane is sort of to try to learn stuff and understand stuff and share, right, stories and history. And so I feel like that doesn't answer your question, but I felt like, in all honesty, I should say that.
So I would come back to you with another question. I don't know if this is a rhetorical question, but isn't a important part of every community the storytellers?
Sure.
Yeah. So I'm just saying, I would cut.
Yes.
I would say, I think you could cut yourself a little slack, because you're not. It's not like you're just in front of your computer doom scrolling and playing video games.
True. I do some doom scrolling.
Comes with the job, right?
That's true too. But less and less, actually. That's been one blessing of what has happened to Twitter, is that I spend way less time there than I did a few years ago. But yes, no, that's true. And I do think that, I guess I would acknowledge that I hope some of my work sometimes contributes to what people do in community and to people's understanding, and that can help the kind of work that people do. And I've gotten a lot of feedback. People found it valuable. So I'm not trying to beat up on myself, but I just want to acknowledge that I'm not, in the most kind of straightforward way, I'm not much of an activist apart from my journalism / documentary work, which I do think is a kind of activism.
It definitely
but there
is.
are other kinds of, sometimes I do feel like, I should be doing more. I should be more hands-on. I should be out there, like, feeding people or something. And I don't do a lot of that. Let me see if I would just go back to so much of what I'm seeing in Minneapolis that I just find really inspiring.
Yeah.
The people who are feeding people, the people who are giving people picking up their neighbors' kids and taking them to school, so the parents don't get grabbed at the school doorstep. Thousands and thousands of people doing this stuff, and going out in the street to blow whistles and protect their neighbors and let them know that the invaders are around. I find that it moves me.
Yeah. I so appreciate you taking the time to sit with me. It's interesting when you said that, I'm big on community, but I don't participate in community as much as I think I should. And like, I do, there's a part of me that wants to be more on the ground. And then a friend of mine said recently, because he's kind of a mentor, and I told him I was struggling with some things in terms of what is my role in some of this stuff. He's like, cut yourself some slack, because there's soldiers and then there are surveyors, and you need both. You need someone who can kind of take a step back and kind of view things and start to see where the connections are. And so I kind of more in that role right now. And I think I would say that is 100% the role you're in, because I think you're putting some really important information out for us. So just so grateful that you were willing to sit down and talk. This is going to be awesome to listen back on and actually hear my voice next to your voice.
Appreciate it. Well, I'm honored to have been asked. I enjoyed it very much.
Great.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.